The morning fog clung to Clearwater Bay like a damp blanket, softening the edges of the horizon and swallowing the first hints of sunrise. The bay was usually tranquil at this hour, the water stretching calm and inviting for early fishermen. Today, though, the silence was different, almost expectant, as if the water itself were holding its breath. Luis, Marco, and Tito cut through the mist in their small fishing boat, nets tucked behind them, the motor sputtering gently. Luis squinted at the gray water ahead. "What's that?" he muttered, his voice low, almost swallowed by the soft lapping of the waves. Tito, ever the skeptic, leaned forward. "Looks like a kayak." Marco shook his head. "Nobody kayaks this far out. Not at this hour. Not with the fog this thick." They slowed the boat. The shape became clearer. Small. Fragile. A dinghy. An emergency raft drifting with nothing inside but a solitary form curled in the corner. Luis swallowed, the hair on the back of his neck rising. "Oh, Dios mío. She's alive." As they drew closer, they saw her clearly, a young woman, pale and battered, her clothes torn, hair plastered to her face with seawater. Her body trembled faintly, and her hand was tightly clenched around a small smartphone. Her lips moved silently, as if she were whispering to someone invisible. Marco reached forward, checking for a pulse. It was faint, not gone, still there. "Help me lift her," Luis said, urgency sharpening his voice. "Careful, careful now." They dragged her into the boat gently, covering her with a thick blanket. The silence of the morning was now heavy with dread. None of them spoke for a long moment, their hands gripping the sides of the boat, watching the woman struggle to breathe. Then Tito noticed the phone. "She's clutching it." "Should we look?" he asked hesitantly. Luis hesitated. "It's personal, but if it helps." Tito picked up the device. The screen lit up. There was a message, unsent, glowing faintly in the morning light. "If anything happens to me, tell my mom I was right." Luis felt the blood drain from his face. His fingers trembled as he handed the phone back. The words lingered in the air like a curse, dense and heavy. Who had she trusted so much to leave this message? And why did it feel like a warning rather than a farewell? By the time the Coast Guard arrived, she had barely opened her eyes. Her lashes fluttered like fragile moth wings, but she didn't speak. Not yet. Detective Sarah Rivera crouched beside the dinghy, observing the scene with measured calm. She had been with Clearwater's Special Investigations Unit for nearly 12 years. She'd seen everything from smuggling to homicide, but something about the stillness in the woman's eyes, made her uneasy. "Do we know her name?" she asked, her voice low and professional. Marco shook his head. "No, she drifted here alone." Rivera's gaze moved over the emergency raft. Wet, torn fabric, bruises forming dark patterns along pale skin. One hand still clutched the phone, the other weakly gripping a small, delicate necklace. She noticed a slip of paper tucked in the corner of the dinghy, water-stained and curling at the edges. She retrieved it carefully. The printing was blurred from exposure to salt water, but the header remained legible. "Weekend networking retreat. Aboard the Horizon." Below it, the host's name shimmered faintly. Evan Carlisle. Rivera's mind clicked. Carlisle, Clearwater's most high-profile tech investor and philanthropist. Frequent donor. Publicly charming, media-friendly, untouchable. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't know it yet, but this small detail would unravel into something far larger than anyone had anticipated. Paramedics arrived and began tending to the woman. Oxygen mask over her face, fur in place, warm blankets wrapped around her shivering frame. Rivera stood back, noting every detail, the torn blanket, the way her clothes hung, the faint bruises along her wrists and arms. This was no accident. Something had happened. Something violent. "She's stable, but she's had significant trauma," one paramedic reported. "We'll need to transport her to Bay General immediately. Let's get her on the stretcher." Rivera nodded and stepped aside, letting the medics work. Her eyes lingered on the phone, still clutched loosely in the woman's hand. Another paramedic carefully removed it, setting it aside. Tito, voice shaking, asked, "Do you think she saw whoever did this?" Rivera didn't answer immediately. Her instincts told her that yes, she had seen something. Or someone. But what? And more importantly, why? They lifted the woman onto the stretcher and carried her toward the Coast Guard vessel, careful not to jostle her. Rivera walked beside them, her boots crunching on the boat's wet floor, mind racing through possibilities. Who had left her here? Why had she been abandoned? And what did that cryptic message to her mother mean? Louise pointed toward the corner of the dinghy. Detective, there's something else. Another piece of paper. Rivera carefully retrieved it. A small, water-damaged invitation, folded and stuck beneath a seat. Her pulse quickened as she read. Weekend networking retreat. Aboard the Horizon. Host, Evan Carlisle. The handwriting was neat, corporate, polished, but the wet edges and smudged ink gave it a sinister tone, like a warning buried inside civility. Rivera tucked it into an evidence bag, making sure it would be preserved. She would later run it through for fingerprints, cross-reference guest lists, and pull any surveillance she could. But already, she sensed the gravity of what she was holding. The ambulance doors closed. The sirens pierced the fog. The early morning light hit the water, reflecting Alyssa's face, pale and worn, yet unmistakably alive. Rivera lingered. Her eyes swept the bay. Somewhere out there, the truth waited, tangled with secrets, lies, and danger. And the girl in that dinghy was the only key to unlocking it. Rivera didn't know her name. She didn't know what had happened. But she knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the ambulance disappeared into the mist, Rivera bent down, voice soft, almost to herself. Who are you? And what have they done to you? And somewhere, in the shadowed silence of the bay, the story began to unfold. Alyssa is now stable enough to communicate, but only in fragments. She remembers glimpses of the night, laughter, footsteps, water, a shadow, but nothing complete. Her mother and Detective Rivera begin piecing together her life, one delicate thread at a time, unaware of the dark forces still lurking just beyond reach.
This is CrimeAtlas. Thank you for joining us today. Hit the like button if you enjoy this video, subscribe, and turn on your post notifications.
The first thing anyone noticed about Alyssa Monroe was her quiet determination. She wasn't flashy, and she rarely demanded attention, but there was an unmistakable depth in her eyes, the kind of depth that came from years of carrying burdens alone. Alyssa grew up in Tampa, Florida, in a cramped two-bedroom apartment with her mother, Denise Monroe. Her father left when she was 9, disappearing like smoke, leaving only the hollow ache of unanswered questions. Denise worked double shifts as a waitress, sometimes coming home too exhausted even to eat dinner, let alone comfort a child. So Alyssa learned early how to take care of things herself. She packed her mother's lunches, managed bills, and later took a part-time job to help cover the rent. She became a quiet fixture in her own life, observing, adapting, and solving small crises before anyone noticed. Her survival instinct wasn't the fight or flight type. It was care. She protected and repaired. She soothed and mended. But care comes at a price. Alyssa had a tendency to trust people too easily, to see in them the good they could become rather than who they really were. Her therapist had once described her as someone who doesn't see people as they are, only as they could be. That trait, both a gift and a vulnerability, shaped her relationships, romantic, professional, and otherwise. She studied hospitality and event management after high school, eventually landing a position with a luxury events company in Miami. She thrived on organization, creativity, and calm leadership under pressure, but the office politics and manipulative bosses drained her. One particularly toxic supervisor stole credit for her work, promised raises that never came, and praised her for loyalty, while undermining her at every turn. When Alyssa finally quit, she lost both income and security, returning to Tampa to freelance. Freelance work was inconsistent: weddings, corporate receptions, charity galas, but she did it all with grace and patience. All the while, her mother's medical bills piled up, and Alyssa carried the heavy weight of responsibility. Every choice she made, every risk she took, was tied to her single goal: giving her mother a better life. She kept a small notebook hidden in her purse, titled Earn, Save, Uplift Mom. Despite all these challenges, Alyssa maintained a streak of courage few recognized. She confronted bullies, stood up against injustice, and never backed down when the truth mattered. That streak would be critical in the days to come, though at that moment, floating in a dinghy on Clearwater Bay. She had no idea how urgently she would need it. Her life before the yacht was ordinary in the best and worst ways. She spent weekends working at events, evenings with her mother, and free moments poring over books or sketching small landscapes in her notebook. She longed for a breakthrough, a chance to prove her worth outside of small victories and constant struggle. And then came the message. It arrived quietly through social media. An unexpected DM from Evan Carlisle, a man she had only met in passing through a mutual networking contact. The message was polite, professional, and tantalizing. Heard about your event work. Looking for fresh talent. Join us for a small professional retreat this weekend. Expenses covered. I think you'd be perfect. Alyssa hesitated. Something in her gut whispered caution, but she ignored it. She was tired of waiting for opportunities. She replied, her fingers shaking slightly as she pressed send. Within minutes, a beautifully designed digital invitation appeared in her inbox, outlining a weekend on a private yacht called the Horizon. The invitation was sleek and polished, with words like exclusive, networking, and career-defining opportunity. Her best friend Mia had been less cautious. Girl, this is your shot, she said over the phone. You work your ass off for years, and this is it. Don't overthink it. Alyssa believed her. She accepted the invitation, never imagining that a weekend meant to advance her career would almost cost her life. By the time she arrived at the marina, the Horizon loomed in the fog like a phantom, sleek, white, silent, and impossibly large. The dock was empty except for a few crew members scurrying about. As she stepped onto the polished deck, her heart raced, not with excitement, but with a creeping unease she couldn't place. That unease would only grow over the next hours. She had no idea that the people she was about to meet would shape the most dangerous weekend of her life. Jade, the bubbly young crew member with a hint of hidden fear. Mark, the polished and charming entrepreneur who smiled too easily. Caleb, the quiet assistant who moved silently and always observed. And Evan himself, whose charisma was disarming. As Alyssa settled in her cabin, unaware that her life was about to change forever, a shadow passed over the deck outside her window. Something about it made her freeze, and for the first time, she questioned her decision to accept the invitation. It was a small, nearly imperceptible doubt, but by the time it would matter most, that doubt would be her only weapon. Alyssa drifts into sleep, unaware of the eyes already on her from the deck, and the weekend has not even begun. Something in the horizon shadows is watching, waiting. The Horizon sat anchored just beyond the marina, its hull gleaming through the morning mist. Its sheer size made Alyssa's stomach twist, not with excitement, but something else, a subtle unease she couldn't place. It wasn't fear yet, not fully, but a premonition, like a chord struck just beneath her chest. She stepped onto the polished deck, carrying only a small bag and her carefully hidden notebook. The crew greeted her politely, smiles that felt rehearsed, hands that shook ever so slightly. Among them was Jade Perez, a young woman with bright eyes and a nervous smile, moving efficiently but always watching the guests from the corner of her eye. Jade had grown up in a small Florida town, the eldest of 3 siblings. Her mother had died young, leaving Jade to care for her younger brothers while working 2 jobs to keep the family afloat. She was polite, professional, and eager to please, but there was a tension in her shoulders, a constant vigilance, that hinted she had seen more than she let on. "Welcome aboard," Jade said, voice sweet, but Alyssa caught the slight tremor in her fingers as she handed her a key card. Alyssa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She stepped into her cabin, the polished wood and muted lighting giving it the feel of a luxury hotel room. But something about the way the cabin smelled faintly of antiseptic and sea spray unsettled her. As she unpacked, she heard movement on the deck. A man was walking toward the staircase, tall, calm, deliberately measured. Caleb Rowan. Caleb was quiet, almost painfully reserved. He kept his head down, observing, noting details others might miss. Neighbors described him as gentle but distant, a computer programmer who volunteered at local coding camps, but rarely spoke of his personal life. There was a precision to him, the kind that suggested he noticed things, cataloged them, and stored them for later. He introduced himself with a polite nod and offered help with her luggage, though his voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I hope your trip here was comfortable," he asked. His words were formal, but there was no warmth. Nothing to betray humor or familiarity. Yet his eyes betrayed a quiet intelligence, a constant watchfulness that made Alyssa slightly uncomfortable. Before she could respond, Mark Sterling appeared, smiling too easily, perfectly groomed, and immediately charismatic. He carried himself with an effortless confidence that could make strangers feel as though they had known him for years. Mark grew up in foster homes, learning early how to charm, manipulate, and adapt to survive. That skill had made him successful, and it showed now in the subtle, controlled gestures he used to greet each guest. "Welcome," he said, hand extended. "You're going to love it here." Alyssa forced a smile, nodding politely. Mark's charm made her skin crawl slightly, though she couldn't say why. Finally, the yacht's owner appeared, Evan Hartley. Tall, immaculately dressed, with the kind of smile that made people want to trust him instantly. Alyssa's stomach flipped. She had met him once, months ago, at a gala, and he had remembered her name. He seemed gentle, almost protective, but there was a subtle hardness to his eyes, an intensity that made her pause. "Thank you for coming, Alyssa," he said, extending his hand. "I hope this weekend will be both productive and enjoyable." It was the first time anyone had said her name aloud in hours, and it sounded strange to hear it in such a polished, curated environment. The weekend had officially begun. As lunch was served, Alyssa observed her fellow passengers. Conversation flowed, but she noticed the smallest details. Jade fidgeted when Mark laughed. Caleb's gaze lingered on Evan far longer than necessary. Mark occasionally glanced at Alyssa in a way that suggested he was assessing her, but for what, she couldn't say. Alyssa tried to relax, focusing on the seafood platter in front of her. But every so often, her thoughts wandered to the little premonition she had felt as she boarded, that the calm of the horizon was artificial, a veneer hiding something darker beneath the surface. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Evan gathered everyone on the upper deck for a toast. Glasses clinked, and the golden light reflected off the water. Alyssa raised her glass, trying to mirror the smiles of the others. Then, she noticed it, Jade slipping away quietly, retreating down a side corridor. Something about the hurried movement, the furtive glance back, set Alyssa's heart racing. She wanted to ask, but by the time she moved, Jade had vanished. Alyssa can't shake the feeling that someone is watching her from the shadows of the horizon, and Jade's sudden disappearance hints at secrets that haven't yet surfaced. As night fell, the horizon transformed. The upper deck lights softened to a warm glow, and the gentle rocking of the yacht created a soothing rhythm. Alyssa, unable to sleep, wandered toward the observation deck, notebook in hand. Her mind raced with questions. Why had Jade disappeared? Why did Caleb watch everyone so closely? And what exactly was this weekend meant to accomplish? Evan Hartley appeared from the stairwell, quiet and composed, a glass of wine in hand. Alyssa froze for a moment, unsure whether to greet him. He smiled, a gesture both familiar and unsettling. "You're awake," he said softly. "I imagine this is all overwhelming." She nodded, unsure how to respond. There was something magnetic about him, yet something about his presence made her heart tighten, not from fear, but from unease she couldn't articulate. Evan grew up in the rarefied world of wealth and privilege, but it hadn't been easy. His father, a cold real estate magnate, demanded perfection, and Evan had learned early how to adapt to survive in a world that valued results over feelings. He had few true friends, and most relationships were transactional, even romantic ones. Alyssa didn't know that yet. She only knew that he smiled at her, with a familiarity that made her feel both seen and scrutinized. "I'm here if you need anything," he said, handing her a small folder. Inside were documents detailing the weekend schedule, networking sessions, team-building exercises, and some evening leisure activities. Alyssa glanced through them. Everything seemed normal, professional, polished, luxurious. But Evan's eyes lingered on her face for a beat too long, and she felt the first flicker of distrust. Something about the way he observed her was personal. Before she could ask a question, a muffled thump echoed from below deck. Both paused. Evan's brow furrowed, but he said nothing. The sound passed, leaving a ringing in the silence. "Everything's fine," he said after a moment, too quickly. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow is full." Alyssa nodded, retreating to her cabin. Yet sleep eluded her. She thought of her mother, of the sacrifices she had made, and of her own intuition whispering that not everything aboard the Horizon was as it seemed. She would later learn that Evan's carefully curated exterior was a mask for ambition, guilt, and desperation, but not yet. At this moment, all Alyssa saw was charm and a quiet intensity that both comforted and unsettled her. The thump echoes again, louder this time. Alyssa hears hushed voices beneath the floorboards, but she can't make out the words. She presses her ear to the door, and then it stops. Silence, but the feeling of being watched lingers. Morning brought the horizon to life. The sun glinted off the waves, and Alyssa, trying to shake the previous night's unease, joined a small breakfast gathering in the lounge. Jade was back, but her movements were stiff, almost rehearsed. Caleb sat across the table, eyes scanning the room, noting everything. Caleb Rowan had always been quiet. Growing up in suburban Florida, he had excelled academically but struggled socially. He had a knack for patterns, for observation, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Friends described him as kind, introverted, and dependable, but never particularly warm. His movements were precise, deliberate, and careful, like someone who always calculated the consequences of every action. Alyssa noticed that Caleb watched everyone differently than she did. He observed without engaging, cataloging gestures, expressions, even tiny habits. A slight twitch of Jade's shoulder. The way Mark's smile faltered when Evan spoke. The way the wind moved through the rigging. Nothing escaped his notice. When she introduced herself, Caleb gave a soft nod, shaking her hand lightly. "I'm glad you made it," he said. His voice was polite, almost too formal. There was a distance there, a quiet wall he kept firmly in place. During breakfast, casual conversation flowed, but Alyssa found herself drawn to Caleb's quietude. Unlike Mark's performative charm or Evan's disarming charisma, Caleb offered no pretense. Yet the very stillness made her wary. She sensed something beneath it, though she couldn't put her finger on what. Later, as she wandered the upper deck alone, she caught glimpses of the yacht's hidden nooks. A small laboratory area, storage rooms with locked doors, and a set of stairs leading further below deck. Caleb moved through these spaces efficiently, never interacting unnecessarily, yet always aware of every guest's position. Alyssa tried to tell herself that this was normal for a large yacht, but a knot of unease formed in her stomach. She noticed him standing on the far deck, observing her without moving, silently assessing. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she felt a shiver. There was nothing threatening, yet something unspoken passed between them. Caleb turned away, and the moment was gone, but the sensation lingered. Alyssa hears a faint metallic click from below deck. She glances toward Caleb. He's nowhere near the sound. Someone else is moving in the shadows. She feels eyes on her again, and for the first time, the horizon doesn't feel like a safe place. The sun had climbed high, casting a brilliant sheen across the horizon's deck. Breakfast had ended, leaving a lingering scent of coffee and pastries. Alyssa sat at a corner table, notebook open, but her eyes wandered, scanning the yacht. There was movement in the shadows of the upper deck. Mark Sterling approached, hands clasped casually behind his back. His smile was broad, easy, and polished, the kind that made strangers trust him almost instantly. Yet Alyssa noticed the precision in it, the careful calibration of charm. He had learned long ago to read rooms, gauge reactions, and deliver the exact word, gesture, or laugh to suit any audience. "Good morning, Alyssa," he said smoothly, seating himself across from her. "Hope you slept well." Yes," she replied cautiously, measuring her tone. Mark nodded, as though reading her hesitation like a page. "I know weekends like this can feel a bit overwhelming. New faces, tight schedules. You're adjusting well, though." He had the kind of charisma that could disarm a person in seconds, but Alyssa felt an itch of suspicion she couldn't quite name. Something about the calculated warmth felt rehearsed, almost protective. But of what? Mark grew up in foster care, bouncing from home to home, learning early how to charm adults and peers alike. Survival had demanded performance, and the skills he had honed in childhood had translated seamlessly into the business world. He thrived in professional networking, throwing parties, retreats, and meetings where his presence commanded attention. He had a natural ability to persuade, to create trust or illusion. Yet, beneath the polished surface, there was always calculation. Alyssa noticed subtle cues. The way his gaze lingered a fraction too long on Evan, the quick glance at Caleb, the almost imperceptible flexing of his fingers when he laughed. Nothing overt, but enough to unsettle someone attuned to small details. As they talked, Mark mentioned casual anecdotes, trips, charity events, minor professional successes. Alyssa listened politely but kept her focus on the yacht around her, the hidden stairways, the storage rooms, the faint hum of machinery below deck. "You're very observant," Mark said suddenly, noting her gaze on the railing. "That will serve you well here." She smiled faintly, unsure whether he meant it as a compliment or a warning. Later that afternoon, Alyssa wandered near the edge of the upper deck and saw Caleb watching her again, silently, his expression unreadable. Then she noticed movement near the lower deck, a shadow slipping past a partially open hatch. She froze. No one else was in sight. Mark's voice called out from behind her. "Exploring already?" She turned, startled. He smiled, but his eyes had caught something. Something small, hidden. Alyssa didn't know what, but she felt a shiver crawl down her spine. The shadow below deck moves again. Alyssa hears a faint metallic scrape. Mark notices her pause, his smile tightening imperceptibly. Something in the horizon is not what it seems. That evening, the horizon was quiet. Guests retired early, exhausted from the long day of networking and formal introductions. Alyssa lay in her cabin, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything: the yacht, the crew, the unsettling glances, and the subtle tension that hung in the air. Her mind began replaying fragments from earlier in the day. A muffled argument she had glimpsed through a slightly ajar door. Jade's pale, anxious face in the hallway. Caleb's silent observation from the corner of the lounge. Mark's quick, assessing glances. It was like watching shadows move just beyond the reach of a flashlight. She could sense their presence, but she couldn't see the full picture. As Alyssa drifted between wakefulness and sleep, snippets of memory from the night on the yacht began to surface. Laughter, too loud, echoing against polished wood. Someone crying quietly behind a closed door. The scrape of metal, faint but deliberate. Cold water splashing near her feet. A hand grabbing her shoulder and pulling her abruptly. She jolted awake, heart hammering. Sweat clung to her skin despite the gentle rocking of the yacht. A soft knock at her cabin door startled her. "Miss Monroe? Everything all right?" Jade's voice was faint, almost hesitant. Alyssa paused. She didn't trust her instincts fully yet, but something about Jade seemed genuine. She opened the door, just a crack. "Can I help you?" Alyssa asked. Jade looked around nervously, then whispered, "You should be careful. Don't trust anyone fully here." "Not yet." Alyssa's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Jade shook her head, glancing over her shoulder. "I can't, not yet. But I think you're different. You need to watch." Before Alyssa could respond, Jade vanished down the corridor. The warning, short and cryptic, left a chill in her chest. Later, when Alyssa tried to recount her fragments of memory to herself, she realized that she couldn't put the pieces together yet. Each memory was a shadow of an event, a whisper of truth. But the haze suggested danger, and she knew, instinctively, that someone aboard the Horizon had orchestrated more than simple networking activities. Alyssa hears distant footsteps on the upper deck and a faint, hurried whisper of her name, followed by sudden silence. She cannot tell whose voice it was. The next morning, Alyssa awoke early, compelled by unease. She wandered the horizon quietly, noting details she had previously overlooked. The polished floors reflected more than just light. The staircases had alcoves. Storage compartments were locked tight with unfamiliar key codes. She began piecing together the fragments. Jade's anxiety, Caleb's silent observation, Mark's carefully calculated charm, Evan's intensity and subtle control. Alyssa realized that every guest was being watched, every movement cataloged, and she had no idea why. Down in the main lounge, she found Caleb adjusting equipment for the day's networking exercises. He didn't acknowledge her at first, focused intently on some small device. Alyssa observed silently, noting the precision of his movements. "You notice a lot," Caleb said finally, not looking up. His voice was soft, neutral, but not unkind. "I try to," Alyssa replied carefully. "Good," he said. "You'll need it." The word sent a jolt through her. He had not smiled. He had not threatened. But he had said enough. Enough to hint at layers beneath the surface, at dangers she could not yet understand. Later, she explored the lower deck, finding corridors she had not noticed before. Locked doors, small labs, and storage areas. She tried to peer inside, but everything was obscured. A faint metallic sound echoed. A tool dragged across the floor somewhere behind one of the doors. Alyssa froze. Someone was moving, deliberately, quietly, and she was alone. She retreated to her cabin, heart pounding, but she could not shake the sensation of being watched. Caleb had been nowhere near the lower deck. Mark was occupied in the lounge, and Jade had vanished again. She picked up her notebook, scribbling observations and fragments of memory, trying to make sense of the unease that had taken root deep in her chest. Alyssa discovers a small metallic object wedged beneath a hatch panel, a key, or perhaps a tool. Before she can examine it further, she hears the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching rapidly, coming from the corridor outside her cabin. Night had fallen again on the horizon, but Alyssa could not sleep. The yacht rocked gently, a lullaby for some, a warning for her. Her fragments of memory grew sharper, jagged and violent in her mind. Two men arguing in low, urgent tones. A shout of her name, her voice echoing back in panic. Footsteps pounding across the deck. The sudden cold splash of water at her feet. Someone grabbing her roughly, dragging her toward the lower deck. Her breathing quickened. Each detail came unbidden, flashing like a strobe in her mind. She felt herself there, reliving the fear, the helplessness, the betrayal. Jade appeared suddenly at her cabin door, looking pale and anxious. "You shouldn't be alone," she whispered. They think you're just another guest. But you're not." Alyssa's pulse surged. "What do you mean?" Jade shook her head. "I saw things. I wasn't supposed to. And you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. But you're different. You notice." Before Alyssa could press for more, Jade vanished down the corridor. The warning was chilling. As Alyssa paced her cabin, the memories sharpened. She could hear distinct voices now, though fragmented. She saw too much. "We can't let her. Make sure she doesn't survive." Her stomach turned. She knew it wasn't just fear or imagination. Someone aboard the Horizon had orchestrated something dark, something premeditated. She recalled the argument more vividly now. Evan's voice, calm but tense, Mark's loud, measured rebuttals, Caleb's quiet interjections, and Jade's silently witnessing. Their interactions had been subtle to the untrained eye, but to Alyssa, every tone, pause, and glance had meaning. Then the terrifying clarity. Someone had been planning her disappearance long before she set foot on the yacht. The realization made her shiver. She could see the sequence. Confrontation, struggle, her being overpowered, dragged into a locked room. She remembered cold metal against her skin, the muffled cries, the suffocating fear. By morning, she knew she had to act, but she was alone, surrounded by people who seemed charming, helpful, and utterly deceptive. Alyssa whispers to herself, "I wasn't the only one on that boat," realizing that there was another victim, or a target intended for someone else entirely. Her fear deepens as the implications settle in. This weekend was never about networking. Detective Rivera had spent the morning reviewing guest lists, crew schedules, and security footage, or the little that existed. Surveillance gaps were frustrating. Hours were missing during the crucial time when the incident had occurred. She examined phone records, finding overlapping locations that didn't make sense. Caleb's phone pinged a location on the lower deck, while he claimed to have been on the upper deck. Mark had sent a vague text message claiming he was alone, though witnesses had seen him elsewhere. Evan's timeline was murky, and Jade's account was hesitant, contradictory, and filled with pauses. Rivera's instincts told her that the yacht held secrets, small but dangerous, and that Alyssa had observed far more than she realized. Meanwhile, Alyssa's memories were becoming clearer. She could piece together glimpses. Mark arguing with someone over a crate she couldn't see clearly. Caleb silently following them, cataloging every move. Evan stepping in with controlled authority, trying to calm a volatile situation. Jade witnessing everything, frozen between fear and compliance. Alyssa realized something crucial. Someone aboard had wanted to harm her, but she wasn't the intended target. A miscalculation, perhaps, or a deliberate substitution. Rivera's investigation intersected with Alyssa's fragments. A trace of blood was found beneath a storage hatch, matching DNA that didn't belong to Alyssa. Another trace, metal fragments, hinted at tampering with equipment below deck. Jade's anxiety became more apparent. Rivera interviewed her again. I saw things I shouldn't have, Jade admitted. I didn't touch anything, I swear. But something went wrong. It wasn't supposed to happen. Rivera's mind raced. If Jade wasn't the perpetrator, then who had orchestrated the nightmare? Every guess seemed too composed, too polished, yet small inconsistencies suggested guilt. DNA tests arrive. The stains on the yacht belonged to someone unexpected, someone who seemed harmless, someone everyone trusted. Rivera pieced together the weekend like a jigsaw puzzle, and two shocking truths emerged. Alyssa was not the intended victim. The true target was another woman, unknown to the guests, meant to be removed for reasons tied to business leverage. Alyssa's presence had been an error, a cruel substitution in a plan already meticulously crafted. Evan's disappearance post-weekend wasn't because he was guilty. He had received threats to his family, and his absence was a desperate act to protect them. His charm and authority had been genuine, masking a man cornered into difficult choices. Alyssa's memories became vivid and horrifying. She remembered being dragged, restrained, and threatened. The meticulous care with which someone removed evidence. The faint scent of antiseptic as a door closed behind her. Jade's confession added another layer. She had seen the orchestrator, someone who had appeared to be minor, innocent, quietly observing. She had frozen, paralyzed with fear, too afraid to intervene, but now willing to reveal fragments. Rivera connected the dots. The traces of blood and metallic tools matched the orchestrator's movements. Alyssa's accounts aligned with physical evidence aboard the Horizon. Every guest had a role, but the mastermind was hidden in plain sight, underestimated. Alyssa, exhausted and terrified, whispered, "I remember them all, but not who wanted me gone. Only that I wasn't meant to be here." Rivera and Alyssa realized the most dangerous person aboard is the one everyone assumed harmless, the one watching silently all along. The Horizon was silent, anchored miles from shore, its polished deck gleaming under the early morning sun. Rivera and forensic teams reconstructed the sequence of horror. The final twist emerged. Caleb Rowan, the quiet observer, had been manipulating events behind the scenes, not as a random predator, but to protect a hidden secret of his own. He had meticulously planned the disappearance, misdirecting suspicion while orchestrating the chaos that led to Alyssa's near-fatal ordeal. The truth was more sinister than anyone anticipated. Caleb had intended to remove someone else, tied to a personal vendetta. Alyssa had been a tragic substitute. Mark and Evan had been manipulated, their charm and influence used to cover tracks. Jade had witnessed, but feared retaliation. Alyssa's organs had been targeted by Caleb in a meticulous plan. He had hoped to stage it as an accident, using medical knowledge he acquired online and from observation. But the plan had gone awry, leaving Alyssa barely alive, adrift in the dinghy. Rivera orchestrated the arrest carefully. Caleb's calm demeanor, his habitual observation, had hidden the truth for days. Mark and Evan were cleared of suspicion, though shaken by the revelation. Jade, traumatized, finally spoke openly, helping Rivera finalize the reconstruction of the events. Alyssa, fragile but alive, was slowly recovering in the hospital. She would survive, but her ordeal left deep emotional scars. She realized the line between trust and danger was thinner than she had ever imagined. The yacht, once a symbol of opportunity, had become a floating nightmare, a place where appearances masked deadly intentions. Rivera discovers a message left on Alyssa's phone from Caleb, composed before his arrest. This was never about you alone. Others are coming. Watch the horizon carefully. The implication is chilling. The events aboard the horizon were only the beginning. A chill ran down Alyssa's spine. The ordeal was over, for now. But the words hinted at a far larger game, one she was only beginning to understand. She looked at Rivera, a voice trembling but determined. Who else is out there? And will they come for me next? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the horizon bobbed silently on the dark waters, hiding secrets that no one had yet uncovered. Who are these others Caleb referred to? What do you think happens next? Let us know in the comments.